Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream, the part where we A your cues. And what? And that's what we're going to do as soon as we know what they are. It's hard. Those of you who don't do this for a living probably don't know, but without the cues, it's hard to deliver. It's hard to deliver the A's. So
it's not actually that hard. It's what we do in the first hour.
That is deep and true, and I did not anticipate this. I'm now backed into a corner, having established a position that I no longer believe in. So
you've been there before. You're excellent at navigating these kinds of waters.
All right. Well, then I'm going to correct my position.
Awesome.
It is very, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly possible to deliver answers to questions that have not been delivered, to anticipate them, really, which also starts with an A, complexifying things. But maybe it's time to move on to the part where we get to that, and I can begin to try to live down this embarrassing episode.
I'm sort of enjoying this part.
You would be.
No, that's not fair. We do not have a question from the Discord server this week. Every week, we invite them to send in a question that they most want to hear answered. This is a Discord server that you can access through either of our Patreons. If I will check my email throughout this, if a question comes in, we will get to it. But until then, we will start off with the questions that we have in front of us. First question from DarkHorseEmissions.com, where you too can ask your questions. Seems like keeping everyone afraid, alarmed, angry, and divided is great business for a ton of people and companies. If things start to get better, will we know? How will we know? And do you think things can get better? Many thanks.
Things can get better. Will they? Dunno. And your point is right, that there are people who are utterly dependent on our division. And this is something we've been talking about repeatedly from the beginning of DarkHorse, and indeed far earlier than that.
Yep.
The Hidden Tribes report, which we don't talk about that frequently anymore, but nonetheless revealed exactly the pattern. There is a large majority of us that mostly agree on how things should go, mostly agree on where we are. We are not in perfect agreement about anything, but even the most difficult issues, the ones on which we are supposed to not be able to reach agreement, such as abortion, we actually mostly agree. And, I would say I actually had a number of conversations while I was on my trip with conservatives who wanted to know why I won't just join them. And I told them, look, there are some things that I think conservatives just simply don't have right. And I think it's kind of my job and our job to keep pushing them to see these things. Important ones, including the question of environmental degradation, right? Conservatives are often very quick to dismiss this as narrowly about global warming, about which many do not believe. And that's a mistake for multiple reasons, but even if you took global warming off the table, the environmental degradation of our era is so spectacular and most of it irreversible.
Yeah, well, I will say two things to that, because, although you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from DarkHorse, maintaining wild nature on this planet is one of the things that is most important to both of us. And I think the two things I wanted to say in direct response, which aren't exactly related to one another, are hunters and fishermen, who often tend to be more politically conservative, not inherently. We have plenty of fishermen and hunter friends who aren't, but that is at least the reputation, and certainly there are many conservative hunters and fishermen, maybe in part because such people are more likely to live in rural areas, and having a rural lifestyle is more likely to have you be either conservative or libertarian, to just keep your paws off what I'm doing and let me live my life. People who actually hunt and fish without a lot of abetting technology see the changes, and they care deeply about them. And they may be driven by slightly different, immediate, proximate motives than we would be, but not really ultimately. And in many ways, they have a kind of populist database that is remarkable in terms of being able to see, like background gardeners and such understand a lot of things about phenology, about the timing of when plants flower and fruit, and thus you can see how seasons are changing, and how spring is coming earlier in northern climes and such, in many places, and later in some as well. So like you get these sorts of, well, it wasn't done to do science, but you end up with years and years and years of, well,
people
I've
who are
always,
paying attention to a pattern
I've
over
always
many
gone to
years.
hunt there, and there are less of them now. And, or I couldn't walk through what I used to be able to walk through because it was always frozen and now it's not, that sort of thing. So I will say that there's at least a considerate sort of cohort of people who are often conservatives who really do understand how much the environment is changing. And the other thing I would say is that another group of people who are often politically conservative are, and this is not all Christians for sure, but people who wear their Christianity forward, who want you to know about their Christianity early on. So I'm not just talking about evangelicals and fundamentalists, but will often, and I believe that this comes out of Scripture, although I don't know Scripture well enough to know for sure, basically say, no, all of that is put here for us to use, and therefore we can do with it what we will. And I have seen that from some prominent conservatives, and on that point, I disagree completely. It is not put here for us.
Well, wait.
And I do disagree completely.
You disagree completely with the modern interpretation of this. It does come from Scripture, and because it comes from Scripture, you're dealing with something. It's a great example, in fact, of something a metaphor that was useful that has aged into the opposite of useful. It's now a lethal hazard. But when you were relegated to simple analog tools, right? When you were dealing, the amount of damage you can do to a forest with a machete is a lot less than you can do with a chainsaw, which is a lot less than you can do with one of these machines that can strip a tree in 30 seconds. And so the point is, the belief that this is all here for you, make what use of it you will, is a motivating belief that becomes a toxic and dangerous belief.
Yeah, and it's a way of reifying a hierarchy, which most people do kind of live by. Like, you honor other people, you protect other people before you protect you protect that person rather than that tree if you have to make a choice between the two things.
Right.
So at a small scale, which is all that was available at the point that Scripture was being written, it can make sense as a rubric for living your life.
Yep. All right. So I interrupted you.
No, go on.
So anyway, what I would say is there are places that you and I in particular disagree with our many, many friends on the right now. There are lots of places in which we don't, in which they are conserving what we would call the gains of past liberals, and we are in alignment. I would say that there is a fundamental difference between left and right in terms of assessing how well we have done, right? We agreed almost entirely on the goal until very recently. And for those of us who have been jettisoned from the left because the left has changed its objective, and we are now homeless, and we are looking at people on the right who are defending the things that we believed in and still believe in, there is still a remaining difference if we say, well, all right, all the reasonable people are against racism, right? All the reasonable people are for equality of opportunity to the extent practical. What we disagree on is how equivalent the opportunities are, right? Conservatives are often dismissive. They see, well, this group of immigrants does very well, and they have been transported here. Why, when this other group of immigrants has done less well? And there are often reasons for this that we don't get into. But
well, also historically, left and right disagree not just about what we see as the current state, but about what we think the best solution to fix the problem would be. And so I would say it's not that we, as still liberals, would say, oh, it's all fine now. No, there's still inequalities that could be made less unequal, that could be made more equal. But the methods that are being proposed by the new left, by the woke left, are going to create much greater inequality and disaster.
Well, the new left is trying to get somewhere that we never agreed on,
Right.
and it's trying to get there with tools that are absurd.
Right, but they are acting as if they are aiming for the conclusion that everyone on the left had already agreed was honorable.
Yeah, they pretend. But for those of us who haven't lost our minds, right, there is disagreement on how close we are to the objective. There's very little disagreement on where we're supposed to go. There's disagreement on how close we are to the objective and what are the right remedies. And in fact, the right remedies, you know, there was a time earlier in my life I would have defended affirmative action.
Right.
I wouldn't defend it now. I would say it is justified, but not a good, it doesn't work. It's not a good solution. And so the question is, well, all right, let's talk about what does work and, you know, use that to cover the distance about which we don't fully agree. But in any case, in answer to the person's question, there is overwhelming agreement on what a good society is supposed to do. The differences we have in that group that experiences overwhelming agreement, that very large majority actually that experiences overwhelming agreement, something like 67% in the Hidden Tribes report, the differences we have are small and navigable, right? Which is why Unity 2020 started with the premise that all we need are people in the top office who have three characteristics, that they are capable, courageous patriots, right? It doesn't, there's no requirement on what their value system is, because anybody in that group, right, if you're capable and you are a patriot and therefore are interested in making the country good and you're courageous enough to face down what will oppose you, then the point is, well, we can just be reasonable about what the best remedies are and what is the evidence about how close we've gotten and how much room is there left. And right, those are very, very solvable problems. So I will say one of the things I'm hopeful about in the case of what DeSantis is up to is that actually it does sort of have this flavor about, well, let's just assess where we actually are and what it is that might be done. And, you know, hopefully that's not political. It shouldn't be. Right? That's the opposite of politics.
Yeah, that statement isn't. But already with the clip that you showed of Colbert, you know, it's being actively politicized.
Well, it has to be, because Colbert, whether Colbert understands what he's part of or not, he is a key node in a viciously political, absolutely anti-patriotic movement that has co-opted lots of people who basically have gotten into the habit of thinking, oh, the blue team is the compassionate team. Oh, well, bullshit, not anymore.
The man's a tool.
Yeah, he is. And it's sad because once upon a time, he was a very important road to insight about what was absurd on the conservative side. And now he is a demonstration of what is absurd on the liberal side.
Yeah, not as useful. All right. My sister gave me an ultimatum. Get whooping cough booster or don't see her newborn, a preemie, for 18 months. Even pre-COVID, I doubted any jab's safety or ability to prevent transmission. Now it's worse. What to do? I don't know. I didn't actually know. So I haven't thought about whooping cough vaccine in the last 3 years. You know, we're vaccinated against it. I presume if that was being done when we were kids, and our kids are. It's pertussis. That's right, it's pertussis, and our kids certainly are. But I don't remember ever getting a booster. I don't remember ever getting asked to get a booster for whooping cough. So that's so. I can't speak to the what is the nature of this vaccine, and you know what do we think we understand about its safety and efficacy. So completely anecdotally, I will say, I can't remember ever being advised or having it be advised that our kids get boosters for pertussis, for whooping cough, even when there was a pertussis outbreak at one point in their elementary school.
Yeah, which we've seen a couple of those.
We've seen a couple of those, right? And no one ever said like, "Oh, you adults should probably have your titers checked and get a booster." I've never heard that done.
Well,
so this strikes me as coming out of left field a little bit.
So I agree. I think you've named one of the things that a rational response would involve, which is get your booster is always a dumb piece of advice. Unless you can be certain that titer is low, what we are becoming aware of is that actually, and this is something you and I were growing suspicious of even when we had our kids, you know, almost, a couple decades ago. The problem is we don't properly understand the tensions in the immune system and therefore the cost of each vaccination for overall immunity, for natural immunity, and for innate immunity, those two being distinct.
Right.
And so anyway, if your titer is high enough to reflect ongoing immunity, then you shouldn't want any booster on that front. Right? So the fact that we don't test that, it's just like, well, vaccines are effectively free. Why don't you take a booster? What's it going to hurt? Well, here's what it's going to hurt: natural and innate immunity, etc. So the problem is the what to do about the whooping cough. I don't know, because I haven't thought about that vaccine. I couldn't even tell you whether it is a adjuvanted killed virus vaccine, in which case I would be very hesitant about it, or if it is an attenuated virus vaccine, in which case I might consider it.
Yeah.
But the larger problem is, I can now say, look, it would take a very serious scenario for me to contemplate a killed virus adjuvanted vaccine at this point. And I would want to know what I can't know, which is, what is the rational response to having had such a vaccine? Should you go on an extremely simple diet of things that don't tend to produce allergies for 2 weeks after you've had one? Maybe it's 24 hours. I don't know. It's an obvious question somebody should have studied the answer to.
Indeed.
But I would be very hesitant about an adjuvanted killed virus vaccine. I will be less hesitant about a attenuated virus vaccine, though I am aware that it has a special hazard to it. I think that hazard is one that you and I have the tools to understand, and it's very unlikely it goes bad. But the overarching question is, could you trust any authority that now told you, that pertussis vaccine, safe and effective? And it's like, well, I've now seen those authorities lie through their teeth. So that I'm not happy that I'm in a position where I can't take any of that evidence seriously, but I don't know what part of it is polluted by whom.
Well, I'm wondering too, this raises the question of, what are the decisions based on that say, well, this vaccine you just get once and then you're done. It is one and done. Which is most of the vaccines that most adult Americans have. Which ones are understood somehow to be on a regular cycle, as if everyone's bodily response to vaccine won't vary. So I'm thinking here of yellow fever, which is understood to be, you should get your booster 10 years after getting the first one, or as soon as you're going to be exposed again. Like, okay, hopefully that 10 years was based on something, but I don't know what that was, and wouldn't that vary between individuals? Or a third category, which is like rabies, which we are both vaccinated against, where it is understood that, and I can't remember what the periodicity is, but it may be something like 10 years, where every 10 years, if you continue to be exposed, because, for instance, you're working on wild bats, you get your titers checked. That is the first step. Yep. You do not get a shot first. You get your titers checked, and if your titers are fine, I don't know what the points are, what the recommended levels are, but if you're fine, you don't get another shot. So why is there anything in that second category? Why isn't yellow fever like rabies? Like, you get your titers checked. Is it not possible? If so, why not? What's going on there? And why is it, and this may just be an immunology question, but why do some diseases warrant a re-up and some don't? And maybe, I don't know, this is just occurring to me, maybe because the two examples I just came up with are diseases that most Americans don't run into very often. The idea is that if it's like MMR, if you're talking about your measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, that these are circulating to some degree, and so your body is occasionally getting exposed, and so your immune system is a little bit activated with regard to those. Whereas if it's yellow fever, if it's rabies, You're not, unless you've gone and you're living in a place where yellow fever, for instance, is endemic, you're not getting exposed much, and therefore you might expect their immune system has basically ramped down its response.
All right, a couple things to add,
Yeah.
just in sort of building this model.
Yeah.
One, the two diseases you mentioned, yellow fever and rabies, are both contracted by something that penetrates the skin.
True.
So that's someplace that an injected vaccination is actually well positioned to address, rather than giving somebody an injection for a respiratory virus where you may not have created the immunity on your mucosal surface where you need it. Right?
Fascinating. Okay, cool.
Second thing is the problem with titers. What I would now want to know with respect to titers is
Hold on.
is...
You can't get rabies from droplets? Do you have to get bitten?
You can. It is quite rare.
Okay, maybe that doesn't matter.
No, but it's a fair point.
Okay.
There are cases where people have gotten, pee in the eye in a bat cave or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Or maybe it's respiratory.
But maybe it's only highly vascularized tissue.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it
Okay.
is possible, but almost all cases come from
But
a
yellow
bite.
fever is entirely vectored through mosquito.
Correct.
Okay.
Second thing is that titer is kind of a bad... These are all things that we've learned here, but titer is about antibodies, and your best defense against a virus tends to be on the T cell side, where you have something analogous to antibodies, but it's affixed to the T cells. It's a receptor. And so your titer is an indirect measure of how effective that shot remains. But I guess...
we have no way to do the direct measure. Is that right?
I bet you it's not no way, but I bet you it's so expensive that nobody does it.
Yeah.
But maybe the idea is it's possible for your titer, that is your antibodies, to have dropped to a very low level and you to still have T cell immunity, but it's very unlikely that if your B cell immunity, that is your antibodies, are still high, that your T cell immunity has failed you. Right? So that's possible, that the titer is a conservative proxy. So I'm wondering if the reason that the only place where we have been told get your titer checked rather than get your shot is that the rabies vaccine, probably because it is so rarely administered, is, if I recall correctly, absurdly expensive.
I don't know that that's true anymore. Certainly when we got it, it was... If I remember correctly, I think it was developed in Michigan, and therefore not only did the university pay for it, but because we're in the state where it was developed, it was cheaper.
As long as you dressed in maize and blue when you came in for your vaccination.
Something, and some of the story sounds specious, but as I remember, we were both, the university was going to pay for a certain amount, and because we lived in the right state, it was free to us. But yes, it was going to be very, very expensive.
My recollection is that it was paid for us because it was understood to be part of our graduate work, and so...
They didn't feel like having graduate students keel over from rabies.
Yeah, it's a bad look.
It is.
I mean, it's a frothing at the mouth bad look.
It's a mouth bad luck, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think the point is, because the thing is so expensive, probably because it's so very rarely applied, right? You have to actually source it. It was like many hundreds of dollars per dose.
Yeah, no one's got it on hand.
Right. And the idea is that I think the bottom line on this question is that what we have is a medical blind spot, where because it's hard to detect the harms that are downstream of, hey, you've had too many vaccinations and they're pulling your immune system in too many different directions simultaneously, or whatever it does.
The harms are mostly uncoupled from the moment of the shot.
Right. We got so used to the idea that vaccines were a magic bullet that was essentially cost-free and gave you superhuman. In fact, this is what we tell children. Like, this is, this is your superhero shot.
Yep.
We got so used to that style of thinking that we just lost our ability to think critically about the actual trade-offs involved in these things. And in the case of rabies, the cost is so high that the financial trade-off caused people to think about it differently than they do the other things. That's my guess.
Yep. So that, what to do with a sister who's given you an ultimatum. A sister gives you that kind of ultimatum, presumably thinks that she's protecting her baby, but...
Well, here's what I would say to the sister, I guess. I would say, look, it is not irrational to have concerns about vaccine safety and effectiveness in this day and age.
And pertussis is particularly likely to be lethal in babies, especially if it's a preemie, right? Like this is one of these age stratified diseases where, you know, once you hit 20, you're like, you may have a cough, but you're probably going to be fine.
Right. The disease is very rare, even in the case that there is an outbreak where it's circulating somewhere. So we're talking about this mother wrongly applying the statistical likelihood of this asymptomatic relative bringing pertussis through the door, right? Very low likelihood for an, you know, I would say it's perfectly rational, almost no matter what, whether there's pertussis in the world or not. It is very rational to say, hey, if you're sick with anything, not now. Let's do this some other time.
Or, oh, there's a known outbreak in the city where I live or the city where you live of something that is infectious, and one of us isn't vaccinated in a way that feels protective. Like, no visits. Not now, not while this is happening.
Not while this is happening. But in general, you know, let's not be naive about this. The fact is, one of the many, many things that should have been obvious, like really should have been obvious. In fact, I believe I had a hypothesis on the table that said, is this known? Seems like it should be true, is that vaccination can actually depress your immunity for, even a good vaccine can depress your immunity for a period of time, especially a booster, where what you're doing is you are delivering a dose of something that your immune system is already somewhat alert to, because what that does is it occupies those cells and those antibodies that are targeted at that thing. And so
no, and especially like if we are to believe the reports that right now, you know, COVID is circulating even more really, and flu, and is it RSV? Like we got, you know, there's apparently, and I have not vetted any of these reports, and of course now I take such reports with a skepticism that I don't want to have. But if that is all true, this is not the moment to be depressing your immune system by adding a level of security against something that is not known to be experiencing an upsurge.
Right, and in the case of pertussis, you know, has somebody given you good advice about for what period of time you're more susceptible to pertussis because your pertussis immunity is depressed, and at what point that flips and you go into a more immune phase? So the answer is, look, you who are making this policy because you feel it's right for your child actually don't know enough to make the policy for your own house so that it is a positive one. You may, in fact, be increasing the chances pertussis will walk through your door because you don't know what that period of time over which pertussis immunity is depressed by the vaccine is going to be, and it's bound to be something. So the answer is, look, I'm not coming to your house if I'm sick with anything. I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't want to treat it casually, you know, just because it's just a cold or that's what I think it is.
And we can even call it, you know, some number of days afterwards or something. Like there can like you can bracket this thing.
So I think what I would say to this person is, look, I'm not insensitive to your concern about your kid. I share it. But I don't think that what you're deploying is actually a policy that protects your kid. I think it protects you socially from the horrifying case that somebody delivers this very rare disease to your house. And let's do something else so that we avoid that. Let's agree that if I've been sick in the 2 weeks prior to our scheduled visit, I ain't coming. And if I wake up the morning of our visit and I feel something weird in my throat, even if it's the kind of thing that usually turns out to be nothing, I'm not coming. But if I haven't had any symptoms in that period of time, let's take normal precautions. But the harm to your child of not being exposed to their family members because of a hypervigilance that doesn't make sense relative to a disease, that's not good for them either.
Yeah. Good. When did we start, Zach?
You can go in for 30 minutes.
Okay.
I was going to say 3.5 billion years ago.
Nice. Generalists seem more needed than ever, but are they wanted? Studying data science, I'm drawn to epidemiology, ecology, etc., but assume I'll be turned away in an era of expert fetishism and closet conformists. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. But they are, I mean, on all parts of it, like they're just absolutely more needed than ever. And
well, this is the result of this stupid funding mechanism for universities that prioritizes grant overhead. And the fact is, generalists, you know, are not in need of some hyper specialized apparatus that costs $500,000 that will make the university smile when you get a grant for it. I do find the fact that DeSantis or his team decided to call me for this thing positive, because, as I said at the thing, I don't have the specialties that people typically associate with this, but evolutionary biology is the framework that allows you to see how all of those specialties fit together, because they're all evolutionary. And so anyway, maybe we're about to recognize that the toolkit you and I have been deploying, evolutionary biology, is in fact excellent, not only because it's a cool place to stand, but because it is inherently generalist.
It is, and it seems most of the people who wield the toolkit, even with some facility, mostly are still speaking from a specialist platform. And so, they will do what I was kind of goofing on my own interests and tendency in the main episode, starting by talking about squamates and character evolution and such. I can geek out all day on that stuff, and I'm really interested to do so. But it's really important that anyone that can do that, who actually wants to live an informed life, be able to apply the tools that they have from whatever it is that they've done scientifically to as many things as they can. And how the concern that this person will be turned away in an expert of fetishism and closet conformists, I guess it depends on what exactly the context there is. Will there be the job description for you if you can do a bunch of different things? Maybe not. I think, the question just assumes that institutions are functional at all, and they're not. But I was sitting on and chairing hiring committees for a couple decades, actually, both as a graduate student and as a professor. And I watched these job descriptions evolve. And it was sort of during the era in which the term interdisciplinarity became popular. And suddenly it felt sudden, but maybe that was just because it was punctuated, because now I'm on a job committee, I'm in a hiring committee again, it's been 2 years. And now I'm seeing a lot of we'd love someone who can do, this or this or this or this. And someone close to the field might say, whoa, wait a minute, those are wildly different things. But actually what the department was saying was, actually, we know that we have an interest in all of these things, and we don't actually care what your specialty is, as long as you come in the door being able to sort of think broadly. And so I was seeing that in job descriptions, and I feel like I began to see that contract again, as sort of what had been an honest and honorable interest in actual interdisciplinarity became revealed as a fetish for a term. And in imagining that to do interdisciplinary work, what you have to do is put one specialist next to another specialist and see if chemistry happens. And it doesn't, because if you have two real hardcore specialists, they don't know how to talk across those boundaries. So everyone has to have the interdisciplinarity in themselves in order to actually reach across other boundaries that they haven't yet themselves experienced. And so generalists should be exactly what everyone is hiring for, no matter what. Someone with some depth in one or more places as well, some specialty on which they can, wax eloquent for some amount of time, or think carefully, or design experiments, or, generate hypotheses. But being able to connect the various dots is utterly important, or else you're going to do either fine, but not that interesting brick in the wall science, or you're going to be a weaselly little conformist who believes Fauci whenever he stands up and talks.
All right, a couple things. You need a certain quantity of generalism in order for what you're doing to work at the university level, is in some sense what you're saying. You can get that generalism either by hiring generalists, or you can hire specialists who also speak generalist.
Yep.
You probably should never hire almost anybody who can't do that, right? And I used to say that one of the ways to fix peer review is to have papers reviewed not within the discipline, but an adjacent discipline. If you can't explain it to somebody in an adjacent discipline, it probably isn't worthwhile or meaningful or true.
Yeah.
Right? So generalism is an important ingredient, and you need an awful lot of it to make the soup function. Not that soup functions, that's a terrible metaphor. But to make a highly functional soup. Let's just say that. And
Yeah, it doesn't work, does it?
no, not at all,
No.
really. It's not
I
making
can't
me
recover
hungry.
it. Nope.
But I love your formulation that the desire for specialists is often a fetish for a particular term. That is so dead on accurate, right? Some term is hot and suddenly everybody's advertising themselves as interested in it, and really it just means they're sort of narrow, they're weather veining, you know,
Yeah.
and it's really it's bad stuff.
Fashion should have no place in science, but in fact, it's become the reign of the day.
It's the way people get hired, because some
Yeah.
term is hot when you're looking for a job, and if you're the kind of person who says, "Oh, that's not my thing, but let me show you what's important," that's it. That's worth listening to. But oh yeah, I'm on that new thing. Great.
Right.
Well, what's going to happen 2 years from now when nobody gives a damn about that thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember one of my, I'm not going to name him by name here, but one of my favorite people, faculty members at Evergreen, talking about years ago being interested in the ways that DNA got folded in on itself in chromosomes, and being told, what the hell, like not cool, not interesting, nothing to see there, like there is
Yeah.
nothing there. And then long after he got his degree, it exploded. It's like, oh, there's a ton hiding
It's the
here, and this has to be the
huge-
thing that you do. And it was like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the specialization, that's another excellent point, is the specialization will shield you from the truly next big thing that's down the road just far enough that it's not a fad yet.
Right.
And yeah, being interested in histone wrapping and chromosomes was going to be the key, or one of the few keys that unlocked the epigenetic revolution. So yeah, imagine them, shutting down your friend and my friend over his interest in that topic, which wasn't hot yet. Like, boy, what a missed opportunity.
Right.
And you can, at some level, it's just lucky here that it was what you were talking about in the main podcast, but you can see the danger of specialization from your squamate example, because if you specialize too much within squamates, it leaves you without a leg to slither on.
Although a lot of the squamates have legs.
And some don't, and that's why if you see the whole group, then you got legs.
Yet, they're all tetrapods.
Yeah.
Yep.
But not quadrupeds. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Yep. We just lost 3 more audience members.
Yes, we
I
did
apologize.
lose, and I almost heard their eyes rolling to the point that they may have sprained them.
Yeah. All right. Next question. This past week, in one of the Twitter file drops, a new phrase caught my attention. L3 entities. These were mentioned 3 separate times, yet I saw nearly no one talking about them. What do you think these are? I didn't see any of this, so I don't know. Do you know? You probably
Boy, now that I know the term, I would like to go back and find it. An L3 entity.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't even know whether that's the good people or the bad people.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. Does the L3 entity give information on who to punish, or is the L3 entity one of the punished? I have no idea, but I will look into it.
Bret, please explain why you thought Chappelle's joke was funny but wrong. Does funny but wrong even exist? It sounds quite woke to me as a concept. I don't remember what this is referring to.
So Chappelle's joke was that there were 2 words you must never put together. The Jews. And the reason that I thought it was funny is because I think the sensitivity is quite right, that sensitivity does exist, and any of us, Jewish or not, have to be very careful about discussions in this area, right? That's real, and I don't like it one bit. In fact, what I understand, I have not been to Israel, sadly. I would love to go, haven't been yet, but what I understand from people who live there is that your ability to have such conversations is greater there than it is in the US, which is telling, right? To the extent that there is a more vibrant conversation generally about Judaism, what it is, what role it plays in the world, that's healthy. And that part of the problem is that by shutting down that discussion, we don't get to the truth, which is, frankly, it's a tough truth, right? You know, are there Jewish criminal conspiracies? No doubt.
Mhm.
Are the Jews involved in such conspiracies highly competent? Probably. Jews excel at a lot of stuff. I bet they excel at conspiracy, right? Is the Jews...
But are there also failed Jewish criminal
no.
conspirators? Yes.
No doubt. No
Yes.
doubt. And what's more, even to the extent that you will find that there are Jewish conspiracies, as there are, you know, Italian conspiracies, as you will find mafias of many kinds, you will find a Jewish mafia,
Mhm.
right? You will also find conspiracies inside the corporate world, and some of them will have a Jewish character to them because, I don't know, it's a diaspora. But the problem is that when a guy like Chappelle points to this, the implication about that this is somehow directly connected to what the Jews are can't help but be derived from it. And I guess what I would love to talk to Chappelle about is the reality of what he's seeing and what's not real that you might infer from it, right? And anyway, so I guess, look, to the questioner's point, is there such a thing as funny but not true? Yeah, there is. The degree to which a modicum of truth is necessary in order for something to be truly funny, I won't say at 100%. There's stuff, you know, there's absurdist humor that's not funny. That's because of anything true in it, really. Just it's so over the top, you know. But the fact that truth and humor bear a close relationship, but it is not that they are synonymous with each other, is key. And so in some sense, I think the point is, look, very few people could say what Chappelle said and live to tell the tale, right? Chappelle can do it. I think that's awesome. And I love that he can do it. And I also think that the point is, okay, you've raised a topic that's almost impossible to raise. Now that it's raised, can we talk about it? That's the point. That joke, the fact that that joke is funny, means, okay, we all get that there's something over there. Now can we talk about what it is? And that's the extent of it. I think it's a contribution to the conversation, because we do need to get to the point where we can say what it is and what it isn't.
Good. Not an answer to the question, but you talking about various mafias, it struck me that one of the reasons that that all of us, I don't know that it's a reason that all of us, but one of the shows that we have loved, and I think is certainly in the top 5 TV shows for me, and maybe the top 1, is Peaky Blinders. And one of the things that it does that's so marvelous is, in part because the lead figures are gypsies who, like the Jews, have been roaming people.
Yep.
Unlike the Jews, have never been granted a homeland. It's basically a criminal family. It's a criminal outfit with very rich characters of both sexes, and they do that brilliantly. But maybe because they're Romani, they're gypsies, they end up having to interface with members of the other mafias. And so they end up, yes, interacting with the Italian mafia, but also they got Alfie, the Jewish guy.
Mobster,
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like there's more, and I can't think all of, and one of their employees is, and I don't know if employee is the right word, but is a black guy who I think often appears to be busking on the street, right? Like I don't
remember the busking, maybe.
Maybe not.
But they also interact with the North American Italian mob.
Yeah, I guess those are 2 different mobs. They're 2 different, Italian American and Italian mobs. But the sort of the pretense of, well, we would need, and it's based loosely on a real family from between World War I and World War II in Birmingham. They would have needed to make connections with all of the other mafia, because on their own they would not have enough connections. Makes for a much richer story, and that is going to be true of all humanity, right? Like take the criminal component out of it, and once forced to escape from your own tribe in order to accomplish what it is that you want to do, you end up being more interesting, being more productive, being likely to be, better able to do good for yourself and for others, because you're outside of your own tribal boundaries.
Love this point. Here's where I think it goes. We've described that there are basically two routes for human cooperation. The most fundamental route is genetic lineage, right? That because you share genes, it can make a lot of sense to collaborate with others because your genes can be spread by helping them and by them helping you, right? It's a natural.
Mm-hmm.
The better reason to collaborate is because it is productive for both of you. It's profitable.
Yeah.
So you've got genetic relatedness and you've got reciprocity. The West is based on the idea that reciprocity is the thing to follow, right? And the idea is not to pretend that some of us aren't more closely related to each other than we are to others, but the idea is we profit best when we put things like race aside and we collaborate because it's a good thing to do, right? We end up being more decent. We end up accomplishing things that we couldn't otherwise accomplish. When you look at the fraction of the great inventions of the last couple hundred years and you find out what fraction of them emerged from America, this experiment in reciprocity, right? The idea that we are a melting pot, that's fundamentally what we are, and we're going to collaborate, right? That is a demonstration of how powerful this is compared to the other thing, compared to defaulting to lineage.
Mm-hmm.
However, when your racism bubbles up and it makes it difficult for certain people to collaborate because they are shunned because of the color of their skin, because of the shape of their noses or lips or whatever, you create this bias in the direction of lineage-based competition and against reciprocity. And so the reason I connect this to what you're saying is that you've got all of these different mafias, and they, in effect, are groups of people who typically have defaulted into this lineage mode of collaboration, presumably because the opportunities that were available if they played the game with wherever they landed, right? As immigrants, does it make sense, right, to play the game collaboratively with everybody, irrespective of their skin color? Or does it make more sense? Is it more profitable to, blood is thicker than water, to do that thing?
Mm-hmm.
And so in some sense, look, we all get that the mafias are fascinating because they do something that we normies can't do and don't do. They're frightening because they treat other people as non-entities, and that's part of their superpower.
Yep.
And the point is actually, one of these things makes better television, right? The mafia thing makes really good television and movies. But better society is made by egalitarianism and meritocracy, where the question is, well, how am I going to get ahead? Well, maybe I should team up with capable people, and I should ignore whether they're men or women or black or Asian or whatever. I should ignore those things, and I should team up with people because together what we've got is greater than the sum of all of the parts that we individually bring to the table. And so I guess I'm putting together.
It's an argument. It's the correct argument for diversity.
It is the correct argument for diversity, and this is this message I can't manage to get people to understand, which is, look, if you break that thing, if you break the cosmopolitan sense that we should put race aside, do you know what you're going to get? You're going to get a war of all against all, lineage by lineage. You don't want that. We've seen that world. That's almost all of human history.
That's right.
Right? You want the thing that we recently invented that is an alternative to it that works way better.
We come directly from that, and it'll be a quick descent back into it, and it will be very hard to recover the wisdom of the West.
Yep, and we are living that descent.
Mm-hmm.
It is we are playing with fire, restoring the lineage against lineage world, and none of us should want it.
Yeah. All right. Here's a recommendation. Greetings, I'm a big fan of Dr. Ken Berry, who is apparently a big fan of yours. He just did a great interview with Dr. Asim Malhotra and really would like to interview you as well. Would love to have you reach out to him. Thanks. I don't recognize the name.
I don't recognize the name. It's possible if I saw his face, I would. But anyway, yeah, interesting.
Have you seen the new study on myocarditis in Moderna? Very small sample size, but interesting. There's a link here, which is a little hard to grab in this format that we've got. I have not seen it. Have you? Do you know anything about it, Bret?
Nope. I know nothing about any new study. I know that there was quite a bit of myocarditis. The argument was more from Moderna than from the Pfizer shot. The argument was that it had to do with the Moderna shot being hotter in terms of the quantity.
The dosage, yeah.
I believe there is something out. This has been bubbling up for a while, but I believe there's something out that at least has Ryan Cole mentioning it in the last week. I don't think he's connected to it directly, but about the question of how homogenous were the different lots, and that part of the issue.
Oh, is that's come back up as a
yeah, and
issue?
I think the argument that is being advanced is that basically a lot of people got blanks, which weren't effective, but were a lot less dangerous too because they just didn't have the stuff in it. So anyway, I don't know how true that is, but that sounds awfully plausible.
Yeah, I'm looking at the study. It's the first time I've seen it. Autopsy-based histopathological characterization of myocarditis after anti-SARS-CoV-2 vaccination.
Yeah, well, at least, autopsy
Yeah.
studies are something that we have not gotten enough of.
Yep.
A lot of this stuff is presumably unambiguous on autopsy, and the fact that autopsies are not being regularly done is an absurdity, and it's a crime, because we need to know what the effect was, and having doctors survey these tissues and figure out what went wrong with them is a quick way there. The only reason you wouldn't do it is if you didn't want the information.
Yes. And it's published in a journal called Clinical Research in Cardiology. So that also suggests a focus on things that have actually happened.
Gets to the heart of the matter.
Okay. Great to see your furry friends participating with you. One of them's rolling just out of reach. Great to see your furry friends participating with you. Please set me straight on my biological terms. Are human relationships with pets symbiosis? Mutualism seems too strong a word, but commensalism seems too weak.
I would argue that
domestication is a process that isn't assumed in those broader biological terms. Frankly, there's an additional process.
Yeah, I would say that, like many things, the missing concept is lineage. Once you realize that lineage is just as valid an evolutionary level as individual, then the idea of a mutualism, and I don't distinguish here between mutualism and symbiosis, but the idea that we have a mutualistic relationship with our pets is not the least bit far-fetched. Now, the problem with cats in particular, so remember, the key thing to remember with
they're armed, right?
The cats?
The problem with cats, he begins as if he's safe in his own home, living with cats.
They are armed. They are minimally armed, which I appreciate. So the key thing to remember with our two most common pet species is that dogs have an absolutely anomalously long relationship with human beings, 30,000 years.
Far longer than anything else, as far as we know. We've been domesticating plants included.
By a factor of 3, because everything else is domesticated in conjunction with farming.
Yeah.
And dogs were domesticated as a partner in hunting. And so that relationship is way, way, way deeper, right? And it has modified dogs, even the eyebrow-raising weird stuff that looks like they're signaling you is a modification of an animal by this force. Cats are almost the other end of the spectrum. They were comparatively recently domesticated, and they were domesticated not fully because their job didn't involve hanging out with you immediately and communicating with you directly. It involved watching the grain and killing the stuff that eats it. So anyway, they're opposite ends of that spectrum, which is interesting. Hello, friend. But what is true for all of the major domesticates is that
Including yams?
Yes. Is that all of them occupy a much larger space on the earth than they would absent domestication. Even, as you point out, yams is funny because it's a plant, but even things that we eat are experiencing a mutualism, because if you think about the number of goats that would be on the earth, or the number of chickens, or
certainly the amount of rice.
Right. If you think about any of these things, they have gotten this deal where they, the cats exist in your average neighborhood at a density that no predator could possibly exist. So the point is, the very existence of the creature is part of its relationship with people. Now, when you get to whether or not our relationship with cats is properly understood as a mutualism, could be understood as a parasitism in modern, we don't have any grain. Remember growing any grain?
No.
Yeah, so if we don't grow any grain...
So we're parasitizing them?
No. Well, I think somebody, if you just do an individual level argument, you could say, oh, well, they're parasitizing your well-being. You put a certain amount of your wealth and your affection into that was
rude.
That was rude. You put some of what you've got to spend into your animals. That's them taking advantage of you. That's them making, I don't know, baby-like noises and triggering your maternal and paternal instincts. I don't think so. I think that this actually is, the fact that we find that people who have such relationships get health benefits from them means that this has become something deeper, that the grain protection relationship isn't the sum total of it, and it's now become kind of an emotional interdependence. I know I certainly feel personally happier and more rewarded if I come into a house and if there's nobody home, there's a pet, and I can find out what they're up to, and they're glad to see me and I'm glad to see them. So anyway, I would say don't be so afraid of which term was it that you didn't want to use? Mutualism?
Mutualism seems too strong a word, he says.
She. I don't think so. I don't think it's too strong a word.
No, I don't either.
And I would just argue that commensalism probably doesn't exist.
Yeah, true. And also, I guess, maybe the thing that I was getting at with domestication is a process that usually isn't included in other species relationships that are understood to be mutualisms, which is to say that we're also co-evolving with. Certainly with dogs. Humans and dogs are Wow. That was extraordinary.
I don't know if they heard that.
But humans and cats to some degree are as well. Okay, the cat is yelling for crackers. It may be
the cat is crackers.
Yeah.
It is what he eats.
We are getting to the end here. We are driving them.
So I just want to make this one sentence point. Commensalism probably doesn't exist because it's very hard to be exactly neutral in your effect. You could be slightly positive or slightly negative. Being exactly neutral, the chances are vanishingly small. And let me give the example. A classic commensalism that would be in your textbook would be like a bird that builds a nest in a tree, right? And the answer is it's not sucking resources from the tree, but it is probably dropping a little guano on the tree that could be positive. It is shading out the leaves that fall below the nest, even if it builds it,
It's putting a little bit of extra weight on the branch.
Right. So the point is, what are the chances that averaged over all of the trees that get one of these nests that it's actually exactly zero? The chances are exactly zero.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and even if one individual nest actually does average to zero, the idea that that species has an exactly zero effect on that tree, like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I would say, as a theorist, we can even do away with the possibility that any nest has ever been exactly zero by saying, well, then measure finer, right? One photon was blocked somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
Elon
is sitting with Lex Friedman next week. Can you come up with one or two of the most worthwhile questions you'd like Elon to look into?
Yeah, I would say it depends a little bit what the question about, about whether or not this is about general stuff or stuff that Elon is already up to. But on the topics that Elon is already working on, I understand, I think, what he's doing with respect to moderation of Twitter, but he needs a red team, and he needs a group to, in conversation with each other, generate a...
Hey, Zach, Fairfax is right there. Fairfax is right there. Sorry, guys.
Hey, where are you going?
We have total chaos here. Okay.
So, if I can rephrase what I was trying to say.
Sorry, we were both a little worried about
not losing the cat.
Yep.
Elon needs a red team. He also needs a group of people, which might be the red team or it might be a different team, to discuss possible mechanisms for moderating Twitter. And I think he needs to free himself from the idea that he is going to post a perfect set of rules. I am fairly convinced by lots and lots of years about thinking about these sorts of things that what he needs to do is specify the values that the rules are supposed to accomplish, and then he needs to empanel people to utilize discretion with the understanding that it will not be perfect. It has to be non-biased, but it will not be perfect.
So neither of those is questions. Those are things that you think you should do. You and I were talking about this morning.
The question is, how do you moderate Twitter? But the answer is he's going to moderate Twitter personally, and then he's going to make mistake after mistake, and he will learn, but he will pay a huge price for each of those errors. And the way to do it properly is to say, let's speed up the process of evolution. Let's empanel some people to figure out what mechanisms might be deployed, and then you have a red team that looks at those mechanisms and says, okay, I'm going to throw challenges at you. If you write this rule, here's the thing you can't moderate correctly, right? And if you put those two things in concert with each other, you will discover what you might do. But I think the punchline of the story will be, you need a body that can exert discretion over a set of values that are agreed upon, that everybody who signs up agrees to. And I will also say that I've had several discussions about how you might make that scale, right? Because the problem is, if you decide that discretion is the root of good moderation, then how do you going to moderate every tweet? How do you moderate every tweet that is flagged?
So someone else asks, maybe in response to this question, can we all float one simple question to Elon? Is Twitter a carrier or a publisher?
Unfortunately, that question is not Elon's to answer. That's a Section 230 question, and so the federal government has delivered us a mess.
Yeah, but he could apply consistency. He could apply consistency, couldn't he? He could say, you know what? I view it as A or B, and therefore the decisions that we make are based on that.
Well, I don't think we understand his predicament well enough. The problem is that this is a legal distinction, and so what he does has implications that I don't know what they are if he behaves one way or the other. So anyway, I can't answer that.
Okay.
That is a problem inscribed into the law based on Section 230, and somebody is going to need to deal with Section 230 in order that we're not constantly on the losing end of both definitions.
Okay. There are several more questions here. Most of them are about things that I actually just haven't seen. So let me quickly get through a couple of them, and if you have something quick to say it. But I think mostly any comment on the study which warns that subvariants BQ and XBB have alarming ability to evade both immunity and medical treatments and boosters? I don't know this study.
Can't speak to it.
Yeah. Can you offer any advice on the newer Novavax COVID vaccine? I cannot find much info on its safety or effectiveness as an alternative to mRNAs. I can't tell from the question if they say newer, meaning it came out after the mRNA vaccines, or if there's a new Novavax.
I think it is the former. And I will say I haven't looked very deeply. I do believe it's spike-based, which means the degree to which it can be safe is limited.
Yeah.
May well be better, certainly the lipid nanoparticles carry their own hazards. The mRNA mechanism carries its own hazard. So it could well be better, but my question is, how long are we going to keep playing this spike game before we realize that that choice was an error to begin with?
Yeah. On Eric's tweets with regard to 1A principles being dependent on social mores, do you agree? Can such mores be evolutionarily stable? And if so, what traits or conditions? I don't know the tweets, so I can't respond.
I don't either.
Heather, could you tell about your lard et al. Beauty tips, please? Lots of love to both of you. Maybe another time, maybe when it's not so late and the cat isn't yelling. But yeah, I do like the lard-based farro life. Yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, another time. Let's do one more. Many socio-political and cultural problems are downstream of cowardice. Some cowardice might even be hardwired, e.g. neuroticism. How do we teach courage to those who don't have it?
Well, teach is a tough one.
Yeah.
Right. If you have generations, you can teach. You can put people in circumstances that push them just slightly beyond a limit where they can get the sense that things don't immediately go haywire. They can develop the skills that allow them to manage that. They can feel positive about not feeling cowardice and facing things courageously.
And that's, I know you're going somewhere, but like, that's what could happen with a full-time educational environment like at Evergreen and like nowhere else, right? That if you have even just a full quarter, but especially a full year with people wherein it becomes clear that no one is there to win points, but actually to discover truth, you can actually teach the value of being courageous, at least mentally courageous, and depending on the program, physically courageous, psychologically courageous as well. And that really is one of the biggest things that you simply, it's maybe impossible, but certainly very much harder to do if you're talking about, if you're talking about teaching in a traditional way, like, okay, we've got like a teacher-student relationship. If you're meeting 3 times a week for 50 minutes, there's not going to be a lot of trust that can be established, and there's just not going to be the time to push, to push each other around and to have it be revealed that like, oh yeah, I pushed you around and I come back and I still respect you. And like, you can't, like, my disagreeing with you does not indicate that I think you're a bad person. So teach is tough.
Teach isn't tough if you have the structure to do it.
In the standard environment, it's tough.
But how are you going to teach a population to be more courageous?
Yeah.
You can't. You need the structure that allows it. But what you can do is recognize that courage surely exists in something like a normal distribution or a power law distribution. And that means that what you have is a full spectrum of different levels of courage that exists in people as you find them. Mm-hmm. And the key thing to recognize is that those who have lots of courage can make things safer for those who have slightly less. Mm. And so if the people who have lots of courage stand up, then it creates cover for people who have slightly less to stand up, which creates cover for the next level. And so a kind of contagious courage is a very real thing, and unfortunately our antagonists have sort of spotted it, and so what they do is they make it so that you do not see the lesson in front of you. So that if the idea is, well, this person sounds good, I wonder who they are, and then you go look at their Wikipedia page and you find vile slanders, then maybe the point is, well, I don't know what that is, but
that person's a crazy anti-vaxxer.
Yeah. Oh, geez, that's disappointing.
Yeah.
So anyway, you're going to have to tune out the thing that doesn't want you to encounter the people who might know the thing that you would benefit from knowing.
Yep. That's right. Okay, well, this got a little chaotic at the end here, but apologies for that. We've attempted cat escapes and various other situations. We'll be back. We'll be back in 6 days. We'll come back to you on Friday, December 23rd with Livestream 154. I haven't yet decided if we're going to do a Q&A. We probably will.
Yep.
But there it is. And then tomorrow, join us at 11 a.m. Pacific for the private Q&A, which feels a lot different from this. It's awesome too, but in a different way.
It is. So
What's that?
We're not even the same people.
We're not even the same people, as Zach points out. Yeah.
we're monstrous, I think.
Okay.
But before the next live stream, we've got Hanukkah
Yes.
starting today,
Tomorrow.
tomorrow. All right. So happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas.
No.
We'll be right before Christmas. Forget it. If you want to be wished a Merry Christmas
Solstice,
with the solstice, so happy solstice. We'll wish you a Merry Christmas the day before.
2 days before.
2 days before.
Yeah.
All right, you can tell I'm not good with calendars, but
You should have another podcast.
No, that's going to come out between Christmas and New Year's.
I'm also wrong currently.
Yeah.
My own
all right.
You're on a we don't believe in calendars streak.
Yes.
Okay, that was my foot, doggy. Boy, we are so out of here. So out of here. Until we see you next time, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everybody.